EED 6011 Enhancing Skills and Knowledge by Professor Janine. Assessment 3 Negotiated Artifact by Creating a Video Presentation. Presenting by Gyapanya Sengsulibo. When talking about classrooms, we all agree that students come to class bringing with them their diverse cultural backgrounds, learning styles, interests, abilities, and multiple intelligences. With these diversities, students' needs will not be met if they are all taught in the same way, or what it is known as one-size-fits-all approach. On the other hand, their needs will be met if teachers adapt their classroom environment to meet the needs of students at all levels on the learning spectrum through differentiated instruction. That is by tailoring teaching, learning conditions, and learning materials to students' preferences. Taking this matter into consideration, I am interested in conducting a study that aims to examine the impact of DI on students' learning. And to ensure the quality of my finding, I will investigate this issue through 3 different aspects, which are from teacher's voice, students' voice, and the test results of students' learning outcome after the exposures to DI. The purpose is that to find out if this method of teaching is an effective method in supporting students' learning through the comparison of 3 different datasets. To achieve this research purpose, the research will adopt comparative research framework to help answer this research question. How do teachers and students perceive the impact of DI on students' learning compared to the experimental research? By employing this research framework, it will help validate my research finding because looking at the issue through 3 different sets of data that have diversity representation of different voices will achieve a more reliable and accurate finding. And that aligns well with Pragmatism paradigm, where there is a belief that reality is constantly negotiated, debated, interpreted in the light of its usefulness in new unpredictable situations. In this context, the research paradigm suggests the researcher to take into account the result of an experimental research, as well as both teacher and students' perspective toward the impact of DI on students' learning. That is in order to understand the reality of the impact of DI on students' learning. And by doing so, I will obtain a succinct understanding of the issue. Understanding the effectiveness of this teaching method is significant because nowadays all the diverse students are expected to achieve a higher level of academic success than ever in this modern society. Also, since each student is obliged to go through the same educational standard, the implications of this study will be of importance when enhancing the quality of teaching and learning by implementing proper DI in classrooms. Therefore, it is significant for teachers and school principals to understand which teaching approaches are beneficial for students' learning, so that they will be aware when planning curricula which are acknowledging the commonalities and the variety of individuals. In this presentation, I will start with reviewing literature and identify the significance of DI in a broader context. After that, I will discuss the research framework used in this study, which is Comparative Research Framework. Moreover, I will present 3 different datasets, which will be analyzed, compared, and interpreted. Finally, I will conclude my presentation with presenting my final position based on the result of the finding, as well as presenting the implication of the study based on the conflicting result of the finding, and then the recommendations for further studies will be made. First of all, it is necessary to look at literature review of DI before proceeding to the identification of the research framework. Differentiated instruction is a term introduced by Carroll and Tomlinson in 1995. She defines differentiated instruction as a conceptual model that focuses on students' learning through a set of structured processes. Later in 2010, she suggests that It is a teaching philosophy that encourages educators to apply their pedagogical knowledge in managing and guiding a group of heterogeneous students. In differentiating the content, process, and products of instruction, teachers need to consider students' readiness, interest, and learning profile. On my previous research about differentiated instruction, I have reviewed literature focusing on the concepts of implementing differentiated instruction. Please stop the video to read more detailed about the concepts of differentiated instruction. There are 4 dimensions to consider when implementing DI, and they are content, process, product, and effect. These 4 curriculum-related elements are based on the 3 classifications of students' needs and variance. They are readiness, interest, and learning profile. Having defined the term of DI, I will now move on to discuss the relevance of my study in a broader context. Differentiated instruction has a strong theoretical basis that includes constructivist theory, learning styles, and multiple intelligences. The first one identified here is the constructivist learning theory. The concept of constructivism is originally developed by Piaget, but it then be refined by Bruno. It is a learner-centered theory. The term refers to the idea that people construct knowledge and understanding from their own experiences. This theory is seen to be one of the theoretical bases of DI, as it is stated that teachers who implemented differentiated instruction apply constructivism through their lesson plans and activities as they take into account the learning needs of each student. It can be seen that this constructivist learning theory provides the theoretical basis for differentiated instruction by students' readiness and interest. Also, under the constructivist learning theory, socio-cultural learning theory and the aspects of zone of proximal development of Vygotsky are also the theoretical basis in differentiated instruction by readiness level. Turning now to learning styles. Learning styles are the ways in which students prefer to learn. The acronym VARK is introduced by Neil Fleming in 1987. It encompasses 4 types of learning preference, which are visual, oral, read-write, and kinesthetic. These learning styles and modalities are being considered in differentiated instruction because in differentiated instruction, it is emphasized that since students prefer to learn differently, teachers should also tailor teaching, learning conditions, and learning materials to those preferences. Moving on to the last source of DI that I choose to identify here, which is students' multiple intelligences. The theory of multiple intelligences is presented by Howard Gardner in the mid-1980s. He proposed that there were 7 multiple intelligences and later turned into 8. The 8 distinct intelligences of humans that he identified are linguistic, mathematical, spatial, kinesthetic, rhythmic, intrapersonal, interpersonal, and naturalistic. Multiple intelligences inventory is a good way for teachers to get an initial assessment for students, and this is considered to be a tool used in designing classroom activities that leads to differentiated instruction. Following the recognition of these differences, it is beneficial to explore the issue in relation to differentiated instruction. That is, to understand if differentiated instruction is an effective method in approaching students who are diverse, whether their interests, abilities, or intelligences. On this ground, the implications of the current study will be of importance, especially for teachers and school principals when enhancing the quality of teachings and learning in this modern society. Turning now to research framework that will be used in this study. In this study, comparative research framework is being utilized. This framework is defined as a research approach in which 2 or more cases are explicitly contrasted to each other regards to a specific phenomenon or along a certain dimension, in order to explore parallels and differences among the cases. Broadly speaking, comparative research is an approach that is often seen as a method of the explicit contrasting of two or more instances to explore their similarities and differences. And that is in order to arrive at understanding the circumstances and being able to explain their similarities or differences, as well as provide further conclusions, which helps to establish relationships between two or more phenomena and provide valid reasons. Moving on to the method of doing comparative analysis, it is stated that there are several methods of doing comparative analysis. But according to Tilly, the four main types of comparative analysis are distinguished. They are individualizing, universalizing, variation finding, and encompassing. However, due to the time limit of my presentation, I will only identify one type, which is individualizing comparison, because it is the method that is being utilized in this study. Please see the explanation of the other three types in Big Structures, Large Processes, Huge Comparisons of Tilly's book on page 82. In Tilly's book, Individualizing Comparison compares a small number of cases in order to grasp the peculiarities of each case. This basically involves describing the characteristics or features each of the cases being studied. It helps to broaden our knowledge and gives insight to see cases in depth. Let's now turn our attention to the strengths and weaknesses of this research framework. Many researchers who choose to use comparative research framework point out that this framework is firmly established. They agree that it is an unproblematic mode of analysis and its unquestionable logical status can generate reliable knowledge. However, some researchers who refuse to use comparative research framework claim about its autonomy of units chosen for comparison. They explain that there is often an underlying and implicit assumption about their autonomy and a silent tendency to ignore the complex interplays and mutual inferences among the units. Another drawback of this framework is its far-reaching implications concerns the choice of the units being compared. The main point of this drawback is that, far from being an innocent or simple task, the choice of comparison units is a critical and complicated issue. Taking into account both strengths and weaknesses of this research framework, it is clearly seen that its strengths are determined to outweigh the drawbacks acknowledged. And here is how the framework will be utilized to enhance the investigation of this study while keeping in mind this research framework's weakness. In this study, I intend to compare the teachers' and students' perspectives towards the impact of DI on students' learning with experimental research, because I would like to find out the impact of DI on students' learning from different aspects, and that different aspects are from teacher's voice, students' voice, and from external body, which is the test results of students' learning outcome after the exposures to DI. When it comes to method, it is stated that secondary data analysis is relatively widespread in comparative research. Therefore, the methodology that I will use to collect data in this study is secondary data collection methods. Referring to my previous paper for assignment 2, I aim to examine this issue by employing ethnographic research framework and collect qualitative data through interviewing and observing. However, due to the fact that collecting primary data is costly and time-consuming, which is limited in this assessment task, I decided to collect secondary data instead. In this research approach, both qualitative and quantitative data are collected, separately analyzed, and results are compared to see if they confirm or disconfirm each other. Therefore, it can be argued that the philosophical paradigm followed here is more related to pragmatism, which emphasizes the complete exploration of a matter regardless of the method used. The qualitative part involves a phenomenological approach that focused on individual beliefs, experience, and perceptions of teachers and students about differentiated instruction, which is considered to be interpretivist perspective. Interpretivism suggests that there is no single reality or truth. Instead, it proposes that there are many realities created by individuals who experience the phenomenon. The quantitative part focused on the effectiveness of differentiated instruction on students' learning through collecting the result of the examination. The answer to this question revolves around one reality, either effective or not, and that is to understand the reality of the issue through positivist perspective. Now, let me present the first data set that I have collected from the study of Publico, Dijk, and Lawson. In this study, the researchers interviewed 6 science teachers who were implementing differentiated instruction in a public high school in southern Louisiana. Among these 6 research participants, 2 are male teachers and 4 are female teachers. Here are the impacts of DI on students' learning that each of the teacher participants perceives. Teacher A implements DI by grouping students according to their readiness level and by assigning questions to each group based on their readiness. He perceives DI as an effective way of promoting students' engagement. He said, "Over time, I noticed that some students perform better when they have a choice." He also perceives DI as an effective way of promoting class performance, as he noticed that students' grades improved. Teacher B implements DI by providing choices using a tic-tac-toe board. Teacher B also thinks that DI has a positive effect on students' engagement. She states that her students enjoy the class more when they can make their own choices. She said, "I think they got to show their creative side, and that increases their engagement in the assignment." Teacher C provides choices in some of her lessons at the format of their assignments. She also differentiates the mode of instruction by using video clips in teaching. Teacher C believes that DI promotes a more positive learning environment. She said that students react to assignments better when they get to choose the assignment that is related to an area of their interest. She also states that the autonomy in choosing what they want to do for their project engages students in her class more. Teacher D lets students choose a topic to work on. She also noticed that DI has a positive effect on students' engagement. She said, "Students are getting more into lessons, they are learning more, they have less questions, and they are more engaged." Teacher E varies the complexity of assignments and gives students different roles within a group. She said, "If you're giving them a choice, they engage more." Teacher F uses a tic-tac-toe choice board and uses flexible grouping strategies. He said, "I find that when I use more DI strategies with teaching a difficult topic, the test scores are generally higher than those of lessons in which I don't use DI." After analyzing this qualitative dataset, I can summarize that teachers perceive DI as an effective way in promoting students' engagement and academic performance in class, which can be interpreted that DI helps support students' learning. This leads me to my next point, which is students' voice about their experience with DI. The second set of data is from the study of Al-Hashmi and Ayaz. In this study, 6 students who had exposed to DI for a period of 3 weeks were interviewed. These 6 students were randomly selected from the total of 20 students who attended the experimental DI session. During the interview, they were asked to reflect on their learning experiences when exposing to DI. This is to inspect the way they perceive DI. According to the secondary data from this study, students describe the learning environment as one where they felt involved. They point out that the involvement in learning keeps them alert throughout the 3 weeks time of the experimental period. For example, student participant 1 states that it has been a long time since I was in a class where my eyes stayed wide open almost all the time. Moreover, other students indicate that flexible grouping strategy of DI keeps them motivated. Some of them also pointed out that their motivation was high when they engaged in a physical and interactive simulation activities. Furthermore, most of the students are satisfied with the appropriateness of the lesson taught. Students point out that learning this way allows them to have more than one chance in learning the lesson. For example, student participant 2 states that whenever I felt I missed something or did not understand a point, I always found other opportunities to catch up on what I have missed. The next area that these students mentioned is about the individuality and autonomy. From the interview, one student says that I enjoyed doing the task I chose when I did it the way I want. After analyzing this qualitative dataset, I can summarize that students perceive DI as an effective way in improving their learning. And this can also be interpreted that DI helps support students' learning. From here, I can see that the finding of this research shows the similarity to the finding of the first research study that I have presented on my previous section. For example, students state that the class is more enjoyable when they can make their own choice, and teacher B mentions that students enjoy the class more when they can make their own choices. Moving on to the last dataset of this study. Let's now turning to the quantitative dataset. The third set of data is also from the study of Al-Hashmi and Nayas. But the instrument in collecting data and the types of dataset are totally different from the previous one. The total number of student participants here is 40, and that is 20 in the experimental group and 20 in the control group. There are 3 stages in the procedures of this study. The first one is pre-experimental stage, where students were randomly chosen as possible candidates for the study groups, experimental and control group. Both groups then set a pretest before exposing to DI. The second one is the experimental stage, where both groups received a different kind of instruction. The experimental group were taught by the researcher, received differentiated instruction. Meanwhile, the control group received traditional instruction by their own teachers. The intervention sessions lasted for 3 weeks, twice weekly. The third stage is post-experimental, which is at the end of week 3, where students from both groups took a post-test. And based on the results, decisions have made about the acceptance or rejection of the study hypothesis. Please pause the video to read these hypotheses. The researchers analyzed the data by running 3 types of tests through SPSS software. The first type of test is used to eliminate the possible occurrence of any significant differences between the control and experimental groups. The results of the test showed that Group A and B are the best candidates to represent the study groups, experimental and control. The second type of test is run to check whether the first null hypothesis is to be verified or not. As shown in this table, students in the experimental group scored higher ratings than those in the control group. However, The difference between two groups is not significant, as shown in the second table. From this data, it can be concluded that the study fails to reject the first null hypothesis, and this means that students in the experimental group did not achieve significantly higher ratings than those in the control group. And the third type of test is used to check if the second null hypothesis is to be verified or not. As shown in this table, this number shows a significant difference in students' performance before and after the experiment. This therefore proves that the second null hypothesis should be rejected and the second alternative hypothesis should be accepted. And this means that there is a significant difference between the scores of students in the experimental group before and after the experiment. Please see this article for the detailed explanation of the test result from page 153 to 156. After analyzing this quantitative data set, I can summarize that DI helps support students' learning, and that can be seen here where there is a significant change in students' performance after they exposed to DI. And here I can see that this finding shows the similarity to the finding from the previous two data sets mentioned earlier, where both teachers and students perceive that DI helps support students' learning, which means that students learn better after exposing to DI. However, the results also indicate that students in the experimental group did not achieve significantly higher ratings than those in the control group. And this shows dissimilarity to the finding from the first data set, where the result of interviewing with some teachers indicates that teachers feel that when they implement more DI strategies, their students' test scores are higher than the test score in which they do not use DI strategies. Therefore, this could be interpreted that although this teaching method is an effective way in supporting student learning, but it may not be necessarily be better than traditional way of teaching. Nevertheless, in order to make a succinct decision about the effectiveness of this teaching method over the others, one thing to notice here is the length of the experimental research, which is only 3 weeks and twice weekly. These 3 weeks of treatment might not be enough to create a significant effect. This brings me to the end of my presentation. Let me first briefly summarize the main points that I have covered in this video presentation before presenting the implications and recommendations making for further studies. The current study seeks to examine the impact of differentiated on student learnings by investigating the issue through 3 different aspects, which are from teacher's voice, students' voice, and the test results of students' learning outcome after the exposure to DI. Guided by this research question, this study compared students' and teachers' perceptions with the test results of students' learning outcome after the exposure to DI. This study's purpose is achieved by the guideline of Pragmatism research paradigm, which emphasizes the complete exploration of a matter regardless of the method used. Therefore, this study adopted comparative research framework where the researcher collected 3 sets of secondary data. Each set of data was then analyzed and compared to see the similarities and the differences to help answer the research question of this current study. Data analysis of the first data set indicates that teachers have positive perceptions of DI. All of the 6 teachers participants feel that DI improves students' engagement. And the most given reason is that Because students are being empowered to choose activities that suit their interests and learning preference so that they engage in the class more. Data analysis of the second dataset indicates that students also have positive perceptions of DI. Almost all of the 6 student participants feel that they wanted to engage in the class more when their teachers implemented some DI strategies. They point out that the involvement in learning keeps them alert throughout the class. Data analysis of the third dataset indicates that the application of DI results in a significant difference between the pre-test and post-test results of students in the experimental group. However, in the data analysis of the third dataset, when comparing the performance of students in the experimental group to their counterparts in the control group, the results revealed that the difference is not statistically significant. Here is the answer to my research question. Now we can see that the results of the first and second datasets share the similarity of the finding, where both teachers and students perceive DI as an effective way in supporting students' learning, especially the engagement of students. And this also aligns well with the experimental result when comparing the pre-test and the post-test results of students in DI group. However, when looking at the experimental result, where it reveals that there is no significant difference in academic performance between DI and non-DI group, we can see the dissimilarity to the result of interviewing teachers, where some teachers state that their students' test scores are higher when they implement more DI strategies. Based on these findings, the following implications and recommendations are made. Here are some implications of this study. From the first dataset, the 6 teachers who were implementing DI at a public high school in southern Louisiana may make an inaccurate generalization about the impact of DI on their students' learning. They might choose to provide only positive aspects of DI to the researchers, or the researchers choose to only present the positive outcome. From the second dataset, it can be seen that not all of the 6 students' voices are presented. From this dataset, I can only find quotations of 2 student participants. Most of the results are reported as a summary. This might imply that the researchers only presented the positive voices. And from the third dataset, it can be seen that all of the tests that are running through SPSS software are reliable. However, relating to the conflicting result, where it shows no significant difference in the post-test results between DI and non-DI group, it might be relating to the periods of students exposing to DI, which is only 6 weeks, twice weekly. These 3 weeks of treatment might not be enough to create a significant effect. Turning now to the recommendations. Based on the results of the study, the recommendations for further study is that a longer period of time in investigating and presenting the issue is needed. In order to achieve a more accurate finding, the researchers should examine more than 3 secondary data sets. And the recommendation for teachers and school principals is that differentiated instruction should be implemented. Here, although the experimental result of the study suggests that DI does not significantly increase students' learning outcomes when comparing to those who do not expose to DI, it positively impacts the learning process by increasing student engagement in classes, as indicated by both teachers and students through one-on-one interview. If you would like to go deeper into the concept of differentiated instruction and many of the findings that I have shown, You can take a look at some of the books and journal articles from this reference list. I hope you find this interesting, and I am very much welcome for any feedback you have. Thank you very much for watching.